Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my 2019 draft targets for the running back position. On today's episode, I want to talk about two specific running backs, those that you see on screen: Chris Carson of the Seattle Seahawks and Mark Ingram, who recently signed with the Baltimore Ravens this offseason. So I'm going to talk about those two running backs and why I think they're just being completely undervalued in 2019 drafts at the moment. At their current ADPs, they're just complete steals. So we're going to talk about those two running backs, my thought process behind it, and pretty much that. So before we begin today's video, I want to remind you, for those of you who haven't subscribed yet to the channel, click that subscribe button. But for those of you who already are, click the bell notification button to know anytime my latest content is out, and or if I'm live streaming, it'll give you a notification. Either way, for those of you who have been, with the channel since the conception of it last season, or newly just subscribed this week, perhaps, maybe today, I want to thank you all for the support. Really appreciate it, and couldn't thank you enough, so thank you. Hey everybody, how's it going? All right, so we're talking about these two running backs. Before I begin, another reminder. So I've recently been asked multiple times, even last season, Andrew, you're going to make a 2019 draft kit? Yes. I wanted to give you guys an update on where it sits as of right now. So many of you have asked in the last couple of weeks, and I've kind of, I didn't want to put a specific date on it, but July is a month that I really like. So for sure, by the end of July or early August, it is going to be done. And I want to kind of explain to you what exactly is going to be on it, so you guys can have some sort of expectation, because I'm really excited about what I've developed. I've spent the last 5 months working on this draft kit. Again, I'm a solo, I'm a one-man army over here. I don't have other people to help contribute to a draft kit, so I'm working on it, while working a job, coming home tired. Some days I don't, but either way, currently I have 130 player profiles. Player profiles aren't just a small paragraph. I've got full pages of statistics and analysis on their specific players and their outlets for the 2019 season. So on 130 different players as of right now. It's going to increase because I am, I got a couple more weeks, couple more players to finish. As of right now, the document sits at around about 70,000 words. I've put a lot of hours in this, and I just can't wait to show you guys what kind of content this draft kit is going to be for the 2019 season. I think without a doubt, this is going to help you in your fantasy drafts. It is going to give you my thought process on literally every essential player going into the 2019 season. And for those of you who are always in the comment section asking, Andrew, what do you think about this player and why? This is the product for you, honestly. So obviously, I'll be giving out more information sooner rather than later. I will be giving you guys examples on what exactly you can expect to see. I don't want you to go blindly into such a product, but I'm so excited about it, guys. And again, thank you for the support. So anyway, let's talk about today's video. We're talking about Chris Carson from the Seattle Seahawks and why I think he's an absolute target for the 2019 season. Okay, so let's talk about what Chris Carson did last season and what kind of stands out to me specifically. Chris Carson of the Seattle Seahawks was a part of one of the best rushing offenses last season. Now, when I say one of the best, both of these players, okay, Mark Ingram, who will be a part of the Baltimore Ravens, and Chris Carson, a part of the Seattle Seahawks, both of those teams, the Ravens and the Seahawks, were the top two teams in terms of rushing stats last season. So last season, the Seattle Seahawks were number one in rushing yards with 2,560. They were number two in rushing attempts with 534, and number 11 in rushing touchdowns with 15 rushing touchdowns. So already what we saw the Seattle Seahawks kind of turn into, they 100% shifted towards that run-heavy offense, running the ball nearly 50% of the time. It was literally slightly there that they were running the ball 50% of the time. And you don't often see that nowadays in the NFL, but they were successful, and they continue to, send the ball up the middle with guys like Chris Carson, Mike Davis, Rashad Penny, because if it ain't broke, why would you fix it, right? So what did Chris Carson do specifically last season? In only 14 games, he missed 2 games due to a hip injury and a couple back nagging injuries that kind of plagued him for the season, but only 2 games were missed. In those 14 games that he played, he had 247 rushing attempts for 1,000 151 rushing yards, 4.66 yards per attempt, 9 rushing touchdowns, 24 targets that went to 20 receptions for 163 receiving yards and 0 receiving touchdowns, all totaling up for 191.4 half-point PPR scoring points, which ended him as the number 15 running back in fantasy half-point PPR. And that also went for 13.67 fantasy points per game. So obviously Chris Carson is not going to be the receiving back of the Seahawks. He's never really been that for them, but his rushing attempts, his usage when he plays was incredible last season. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that the Seattle Seahawks in 2017, they never ran the ball. Going into 2017, they had just injuries left, right, and center out of the backfield. They brought in Eddie Lacy. They tried to pay him money to lose weight. That was a mess. They had Chris Carson, but unfortunately Chris Carson tore his ACL within the beginning of the season. And as soon as he was out, which, he was the starting running back when that season started. As soon as he was out, the rushing game for the Seattle Seahawks completely disappeared. And that's why in 2017, Russell Wilson was actually the lead rusher of the Seattle Seahawks. So now that they came into 2018, they knew full well, we need to run the ball. We need to establish a run and, take the ball out of Russell Wilson's hands. Because if he has to he has to lead the team in rushing attempts, rushing yards, and still has to carry with his arm, we're asking too much of him, right? That's why they paid him so much. But either way, they went towards this run-heavy offense, and it makes sense. Even with the 18th best offensive line last season, according to Pro Football Focus, the Seahawks were a very good team. Now, the 18th best is probably more in the fact that they weren't so good at pass blocking rather than the run blocking. Run block up front, they were fantastic. This offseason, they re-signed DJ Fluker, their right guard, and they also went and signed Mike Iupati of the Arizona Cardinals to lock up that left guard position. So, they've stabilized their offensive line. So going into 2019, they've got their pieces there. Now, what looks so attractive about Chris Carson? Now, again, Russell Wilson's going to get his rushing yards. Last season had 67 rushing attempts for 376 rushing yards, which was far less than the year prior and far less than he usually has in his career, considering he just never really had to run the ball. They're never really designed. Obviously, they run option here and there, but scramble-wise, he was never really forced to get out of the pocket too often. But talking about the snap share of a guy like Chris Carson, last season he played 48% of the snaps for the Seattle Seahawks. Imagine, he already had 250, or it was about 267 total touches, and he played 48.39% of the offensive snaps. Imagine that. Why is that the case? Well, it's because of Mike Davis and Rashad Penny, who really, gathered the rest of those offensive snaps. Now, on top of it, now you may be thinking, okay, Andrew, he didn't play, he played 50% of the snaps. Okay, but he must have had majority of the carries. Well, that honestly wasn't the case. Chris Carson last season only had 54.76% of the running back rushing attempts. He had 247 of the 451 running back rushing attempts. So even then, he didn't even have. He had half of them, but comparatively to other running backs in the NFL, I mean, he saw a pretty average margin comparatively, right? So why was that the case? It was because Mike Davis and Rashad Penny, they needed to make sure that Chris Carson was healthy, because if he was going to carry the ball 300 times, his body wasn't going to make it through the season. And going into the playoffs, he wouldn't have been able to even, participate, right? So what did Mike Davis do last season? 112 attempts, 514 rushing yards, 4 rushing touchdowns, 42 targets, 34 receptions for 214 yards, 1 receiving touchdown. Mike Davis finished with 119.8 fantasy points and half PPR. Rashad Penny, the first-round pick of the Seattle Seahawks, brought in that many people thought was going to be the running back of the future. Well, he took a back seat this last season. He was actually the RB3 on this respective team with 85 rushing attempts for 419 rushing yards. Good average there. 2 rushing touchdowns, only 12 targets, 9 receptions, 75 yards, and 65.9 fantasy points. Now, talking about their specific snap counts, Mike Davis played nearly 39% of the offensive snaps. It was 38.77, and Rashad Penny played 19.07% of the offensive snaps. So altogether, these three guys, they made up the running back snap count. It was there. Now that Mike Davis is gone, right? Chris Carson isn't going to move. Chris Carson has established himself as the lead back of this Seattle Seahawks team. And without a doubt in my mind, I can't potentially see Rashad Penny dethroning him. And why is that the case? Well, Rashad Penny, he's going to have more opportunity. With Mike Davis, who had 112 rushing attempts himself, gone out of this offense, where do you think those rushing attempts are going to go? I personally don't think that they're going towards Chris Carson. I think they'll go towards Rashad Penny. Sure, it won't have to be all 112 of them, but he's going to get majority of that. So I think Rashad Penny, sure, he's going to have value, but it's not going to dethrone the value of a guy like Chris Carson, who is honestly one of the best running backs in the NFL, considering his opportunity, his snap share, and what he's done within this offense. Also, a thing that we want to look at, Chris Carson, he was even used in the passing game more than Rashad Penny was. And I know a lot of people this offseason are thinking Rashad Penny's going to get a lot of work now that Mike Davis is gone. He was somewhat the receiving back. They still have guys like CJ Prosise. They still have guys, J.D. McKissick. They still have receiving backs that could potentially make the 53-man roster this year. So I wouldn't count those guys out to come in and take the receiving job from a Rashad Penny, kind of reducing his value. But I still think that as of right now, looking at the potential of Chris Carson, assuming he can stay healthy and play a 16-game season, he's being extremely undervalued. As of right now, he is consensusly RB25. He's being considered a RB3 in 2019. That is unbelievable. I can't believe, I just don't understand it. A guy that had a Pro Bowl-esque season in 2018 is going to be considered an RB3 going into 2019 when Rashad Penny is going to take all 250 attempts away from him, and then those other 200 attempts that were gained by the running backs of this offense, they're going to disappear? I don't see that. And I have a hard time believing that Chris Carson should be as undervalued going into 2019. I'll go over my final thoughts on him after I talk about Mark Ingram, but let's go into Mark Ingram right now and what kind of opportunity he has going into 2019. So, Mark Ingram, what kind of an offense is he joining? Like I mentioned earlier, he's joining one of the best rushing offenses in the NFL. Last season, with 547 rushing attempts, the Baltimore Ravens led the league in rushing attempts. They had 2,441 rushing yards, which was number 2 in the NFL, only to the Seattle Seahawks. They had 19 rushing touchdowns, which was number 3 in the NFL, a 4.5 yard per carry average, which was number 12 in the NFL last season. And the last stat I wanted to mention, they had 153 rushes for first downs last season in 2018, which was number 1 amongst all teams. The Baltimore Ravens, they're a fantastic rushing team. I think a lot of that has to do with the implementation of Lamar Jackson, but we'll get into that into a little bit. Let's talk about Mark Ingram specifically, what he's done in the last couple years that excite me now that he joins the Baltimore Ravens, and why the Baltimore Ravens went out and sought his talent and brought him in for a reason. So in 2018, Mark Ingram missed the first 4 games of the season due to suspension. Now, that wasn't really too much of a big deal, but except for the fact that Alvin Kamara was there. Now, Alvin Kamara, in the past 2 seasons in New Orleans has been fantastic. He's been nothing but. Fantasy-wise, he's been incredible. We all know that. But when Mark Ingram came back in the last 12 weeks of the season, in the 12 games, Mark Ingram scored 132 fantasy points, 11 fantasy points per week in half-point PPR. So 11 points a week being the number 2 back behind Alvin Kamara, pretty good, right? He was still effective and he was still productive in an offense that surely does love to run the ball. Not as much as the Baltimore Ravens, but they're efficient when they do it, right? Let's talk about a year prior, because a lot of people seem to forget, because of the cloud that Alvin Kamara has presented on this offense. A lot of people blindly kind of forget about Mark Ingram because they see Alvin Kamara and they think, man, he's so good in the passing game. He's great in the running game. He dominates the red zone rushing attempts. He's great. Well, in 2017, Mark Ingram was incredible. He had the best season of his entire career, posting career highs in nearly every relevant, running back stat. So he had 249 total fantasy points in 2017, which finished him as RB number 6 total. That was 15.5 fantasy points per game average. He had career highs in, first of all, he had career highs in carries, rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, receptions, and receiving yards. Now, those receptions and receiving yards, we got to remember, Mark Ingram, he's not a slouch. He's not like a Chris Carson or Jordan Howard who's not going to catch the ball. Mark Ingram's 100% capable, but because of the fact that Alvin Kamara was there, Kamara got the receiving work, right? Yet we somehow forget that Mark Ingram is a relevant and absolutely capable receiving back in the NFL. Sure, he's not going to be Tariq Cohen and elusive, but he's going to get the job done, plain and simple. Now, going into the 2019 season, a little bit of a difference in the offensive line. Obviously, the Saints have a better all-around offensive line, but still, the Baltimore Ravens, the 10th best offensive line last season, according to Pro Football Focus. Guys like Ronnie Stanley at the left tackle, Marshall Yanda at the right guard. And let's not forget, I always mention them, the plethora of tight ends this team has. When you have guys like Mark Andrews, Hayden Hurst, just 2 rookies last season, they're going to improve going into this next season. If I'm not mistaken, I don't know one of the two, Max Williams and Nick Boyle. One of them signed with the Cardinals. I'm not sure, but I know they have one of the other one. Either way, someone can correct me in the comment section, but they've got tight ends galore, which help in the running game without a doubt in my mind. So going into that, a great offensive line to run behind and great tight ends that are often lead blockers in this specific offense. If you go look at the running scheme of the Baltimore Ravens, tight ends are extremely essential as pulling guards practically, and they're lead blockers on majority of the rushing attempts. So go check that out. All right, let's talk about the other running backs in the Ravens backfield. What they were able to accomplish last year that gives me confidence in a guy like Mark Ingram this season. So Lamar Jackson, obviously, similar to Russell Wilson, he's going to get his rushing yards. And in the last 7 games of the season, Lamar Jackson, he was ridiculous, right? He was unbelievable. In the last 7 games of the regular season, he had 119 rushing attempts for 556 rushing yards, 4 rushing touchdowns. And that's where I kind of want to focus on. I want to focus on the last 7 games of the Ravens regular season because I truly believe that kind of gives us an idea on what we can expect to see going into 2019 because of what Gus Edwards, Kenneth Dixon, and Ty Montgomery were capable of combining and producing last season. So specifically Gus Edwards, as soon as week 10, their bye week went away in 2018, they came back and they played the Cincinnati Bengals. Alex Collins got 7 carries in that game, and boom, Alex Collins is gone. He's no longer even with the team. The legend of Alex Collins is over. I think he broke his leg the other day, unfortunately. Sorry to hear about that, but that guy's life is not looking great as of late, so best for him in the future, to be honest. But Gus Edwards, from weeks 11 through 17 last season, he was just given an incredible opportunity. 122 rushing attempts for 654 rushing yards, 5.36 yards per carry average for 2 rushing touchdowns, and like many running backs in the NFL, had 0 work in the passing game. He had 1 target for 1 reception, 13 yards. Now, in that 7-week period, he had 81.2 fantasy points, 11.6 fantasy points per week. Now, why is that the case that he scored only 11.6 fantasy points per week? Well, he didn't get much work touchdown-wise because Lamar Jackson, comparatively to all players last season, had the 10th most rushing attempts in the red zone. So he's going to take a lot of those. And the fact that he just doesn't get work in the passing game. And when you play in a half PPR, it's going to hurt you, plain and simple. Now, on top of that, Kenneth Dixon only played from week 13 to 17, so only in 5 games. He produced 47 rushing attempts, 289 rushing yards, 6.15 yards per carry average. Again, that's 2 of their running backs with over a 5 yard per carry average in the last couple weeks of the season. He had 1 rushing touchdown, 7 targets, 6 receptions, 51 yards. Another guy that wasn't given a lot of receptions or targets, and we'll get to that point. Now, why is that relevant? Well, they used a lot of Ty Montgomery last season in that last 7-game stretch for third down work and pass blocking opportunities. Now, 100% without a doubt in my mind, Ty Montgomery's gone. As we know, he's a part of the New York Jets now. Mark Ingram is a hell of a back when it comes to pass blocking and receiving out of the backfield. And with Gus Edwards and Kenneth Dixon not really given an opportunity and not really being trusted to be the receiving back of the Ravens, I 100% believe it's going to be Mark Ingram. You don't have Kyle Juszczyk from seasons past. You don't have a guy like Javoris Allen who dominated the last two seasons in the passing game in 2018 early. He's gone. He's with the New Orleans Saints. There's nobody else to catch the ball. Sure, they drafted Justice Hill, but are they going to instantly throw a rookie in there to pass block and be a third down back? No. It's going to be Mark Ingram. I guarantee you I must have said Mark Henry at least once in this video, but Mark Ingram. Talking about running back snaps, like we talked about with the Seahawks, but specifically with the Ravens. Gus Edwards, what he was able to do in the last 7 games of the season, he only did on 49% of the snaps, which is ridiculous because he had 17.5 attempts per game on the ground. Ridiculous enough. In the 5 games that Kenneth Dixon played, he had a 35% snap share. Ty Montgomery, in the 6 games he played, he had a 25.73% snap share. So, to be honest, they used 3 backs. None of them really got much work in the passing game. Even with Ty Montgomery being their receiving back, he didn't get much because Lamar Jackson really doesn't look for that. If he has to scramble, he's using his legs to get some yards. But I think obviously as the seasons progress, they want to make sure he's healthy. They're going to force him to pass the ball. They're not going to let him just take it out every single time. But looking at what the running back position was capable of producing in that 7-week stretch, those 3 running backs scored a total of 150.2 fantasy points, which is 21.45 points for the running back position alone. So looking at what those guys were capable of doing, I 100% without a doubt believe that Mark Ingram is going to come into this Baltimore Ravens offense in the best rushing offense in the NFL as of right now, especially because Lamar Jackson being there. And he's going to run people over. This offensive line is going to dictate games. Their defense is just as good as ever. I know they lost pieces, but they also gained some. They're going to dictate games with the running game, whether or not you stack people in the box. And I think Mark Ingram is going to be incredible, especially with what this team is capable of doing. So my final thoughts before we get out of here. Currently, Chris Carson sits at an ADP of RB25. Mark Ingram sits at an ADP of RB23. Both of these guys are being considered low-end RB2, high-end RB3s, which is unbelievable. Like, it's just incredible. If anybody even begins to think that these guys are sleepers, that's not the case. We're not dealing with sleepers here. We're dealing with Pro Bowl running back talent that is being undervalued because we want to think that, oh, you know what? Josh Jacobs is going to be fantastic. Sure, he can end up being so. But why are we undervaluing guys that are going to have a huge opportunity and a lot of touches? 250 plus is not out of the realm for both of these guys this season. And I think with the opportunity that they're going to get, it's incredible. Now, I'm not bringing this point up to say, hey, we should sound the alarm, DEFCON 1 or DEFCON 5. We have to sound the alarm and make sure everybody drafts these guys earlier. No, that's not the case. Listen, on the DL right here, okay? It's just you and me. I want to make sure that you understand that, yes, running backs, they're going to come off the board quickly. My Scott Fishbowl draft, even though it was super flex league, and even though tight ends were getting a lot of points because they were getting extra points here and there, running backs flew off the board. Now, I want you to remember, don't panic in your potential drafts. If you have to take a wide receiver early, do it, because there are guys like these being slept on later on in your draft that you can pick up and easily can be your RB2 with upside. I 100% believe that, and I want to thank you guys for watching. Those are my thoughts on Chris Carson and Mark Ingram going into the 2019 season. I can't emphasize it enough. I think these two are extremely undervalued and they should be targeted in your drafts, especially when you kind of want to wait on the running back position and don't want to commit so heavily for 3 RBs so early. You can get a guy like this later on in your draft and that's where they're being drafted right now. So again, thank you everybody for watching. If you like this content, go down, click that like button. If you haven't already, click the subscribe button. And if you have any comments, concerns, questions, hit me up down below. And until next time, thank you everybody for watching. I'll see you guys. Peace.